Strong is your justice, strong your love. How you favor the weak and lowly one, humbling the proud heart. My soul proclaims your greatness, O God, and my spirit rejoices in you. You have looked with love on your servant here, and blessed me all my life through. All your blessings declared throughout the land, sing of a Savior now at hand. Come among us, your word so meek and love, He is the Holy Child. My soul proclaims your greatness, O God, and my spirit rejoices in you. You have looked with love on your servant here, and blessed me all my life through.
The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 2nd chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, the Magi withdrew for their own country by another road. Now, after they had withdrawn, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and withdrew to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the Magi, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the exact time that he had learned from the Magi. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled, because they are no more. When Herod died, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who were seeking the child's life are dead." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and withdrew to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was ruling over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And after being warned in a dream, he went away to the district of Galilee. There he made his home in a town called Nazareth, so that what had been spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled, he will be called a Nazarene. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Catch the evening news last night at 6 o'clock. It's not something I do very often at all. And after seeing the news, I understand why. The opening story was about the latest developments in the shooting at the Kosher Market in Jersey City. What a tragic event. It is very sad that we are capable of this kind of evil, the evil that is needed to carry out such terrible violence against each other. The next story was another update on the ongoing police investigation into the murder of Tessa Majors in Morningside Park. Another tragedy. As I said, it's very sad that we are capable of this kind of evil. The kind of evil needed to carry out such terrible violence against each other. Well, the third story, of course, was about the police shooting a guy who was pointing a gun at some people with a knife on the end of it. Then I turned off the news. I was worried that meteorologist Jeff Smith was going to tell us that it was 56 degrees outside today because of climate change and our abuse of the environment, and that we should get ready for blizzards coming in January. I can understand why I don't watch the news. And I feel bad today, though, this morning, because in the midst of hearing news like this every day, in the midst of battling the holiday traffic that's just getting worse as we get closer to Christmas, in the midst of dealing with impatient shoppers crowding every store, you're probably hoping this morning to come and hear another episode in the Christmas story, in the beautiful Christmas story that brings peace and joy to our hearts in this season. And instead, you get this. Something not much different from the news last night. Not much different from what's going to be on the news tonight, or tomorrow, or next week. But I wanted to ask you, do you actually remember that this scene is in the Christmas story? I wouldn't be surprised if you've forgotten it. I mean, the scene appears only in Matthew's Gospel, and it never appears in any Christmas pageants, at least not in any Christmas pageants that I've ever seen. Which makes sense, right? I mean, how do you explain this to Sunday school children? You can understand why I did Chrismons for the children's sermon today instead of actually talking about the gospel story. Heck, I find it hard to explain to adults, actually. What would you say? I think it's important to think about what you would say, because what you say about this tragic story in the gospel is pretty much what you would be saying about how to explain what has happened in that kosher deli in Jersey City, how to explain what's happening to the student in Morningside Park, and the man pointing the toy gun at people and being shot by the police, and why there is climate change. And I'm interested in how you would explain all of these things. But I guess since I'm the guy standing up front in the funny clothes with the microphone, I get to tell you how I would explain these kinds of things. And since I started this by not giving us one of the beautiful scenes from the Christmas story, but giving us this tragic scene, I want to start with that scene and say a word about it in particular. The first thing I want to make clear about this scene in Matthew's Gospel is that God does not cause this tragedy to happen. I think that we have a tendency to perhaps wander into thinking that God has caused this because it says that this was to fulfill what the prophet had spoken. But we have to understand what prophecy is in the Bible correctly. Prophecy in the Bible is not predicting the future of what God is going to do. Prophecy in the Bible is 100% about describing the logical consequences of our present action. Let me say that again just so that you get it. Prophecy in the Bible is about describing the logical consequences of our present action. So for instance, if I was to tell you that my doctor said I should lose a few pounds, and so I decided to go on a diet. And the diet I've decided to go on is the chocolate cake diet. It means I'm going to eat a chocolate cake every day, and that's all. Now, would Doug be categorized as a prophet if he says to me, well, Pastor, you know, that's only going to cause you to gain weight and get sick? That's not prophecy. That's describing the logical conclusion, the logical consequence of our present action. And as with most tragic things that happen, the roots of the chain events that led up to this tragic event in the Christmas story are deep. Beginning way back in the Old Testament story of the Jewish kings of old, the prophet way back then merely spoke about the future consequences of the present action of those kings of old. God did not cause this. a long line of history that is embodied in Herod causes it. Just as a side note, when God does cause something tragic to happen, which God does occasionally in the Bible, God makes it abundantly clear to God's people that God is going to act in a tragic way. He never surprises us. God always gives us some warning and makes it clear God is at work. Because God always owns the responsibility of the actions that God takes. So we can dispense with the idea that God caused this tragedy in the Christmas story. And that would leave us then to wonder, I guess, why God didn't at least prevent this if he didn't cause it. Why didn't God keep these children from being slaughtered by Herod? Why didn't God keep the slaughter from happening in Kosher Deli in Jersey City or in Morningside Park? Or why didn't God prevent climate change? Good question. Why does God leave us to suffer the logical consequences of our present actions, rather than stepping in and setting us back on track, or at least preventing what's going to happen because of what we have done? Why doesn't God just make everything better? Or even deeper than that, why did God create the potential for us to get off the track in the first place? Why didn't God just make it impossible for tragic things to happen? Why isn't it that there's just Christmas joy and peace without the traffic and the stress? As I said, it's a good question. And the answer is easy. I don't know. I don't know. And if I knew, then you would be worshiping me as God. Because it's precisely because I do not know and I do not have the full wisdom of God and understand everything that God does, that God can be God and I can be his child. Now, this doesn't mean that I have to like the way that God has decided things are going to be. In fact, in this story, that prophecy is about the mothers who lose their children to Herod's sword. It's not about how they resign themselves and say, oh, well, this is the way God has designed it, and there's nothing we can do. Something good is probably going to come of it. You notice that the prophecy is that they wail. They cry out to God in desperate sadness and anger. And throughout the Bible, we hear that God hears and is moved by the cries of his people. God grieves with us over the tragedies we bring on ourselves. And so while I don't think that we can explain these tragedies by beginning our question with, why? Instead, I think we need to begin our question with, when? When was it that the roots of this tragedy that we're experiencing were laid? When were the roots of all the social and personal issues that made for the shooting in the Kosher Deli planted? And what do we need to do now and in the future to try and uproot them so that we do not grow even more tragic from them? Unfortunately, I think also that when we ask the question, when, it's like looking at the root of mushrooms. They're complex, interwoven systems deeply embedded in the fabric of our society and in the psyche of each one of us. We can address the tragedies as they pop up around us, but it's almost impossible for us to root out the real causes of why the tragedies happen. Which is why we're actually here, in this place, doing what we're doing now. Which is what the rest of the Christmas story is also all about. And the rest of the story is not heartwarming and full of peace and joy because it's a quaint little tale about a young mother and her new baby born in a rustic setting in the middle of the night. The Christmas story is heartwarming and full of peace and joy because it's a story of God's promise. God's promise that this is not how God wants to leave things here. It's about God's promise to us that there will be a time when evil will be uprooted and tragedy will be gone. The child in the manger brings us hope that we can even have a glimpse of that time by liberating ourselves to have a perspective based on the perspective of this child, a perspective of compassion and mercy and love for one another. Things that actually don't lead to tragedy, but as Jesus prophesies, things that lead to wholeness and renewal and contentment. However, we know that despite our resolve to root ourselves in what Jesus teaches, the reality is that tragedy still exists and that we are suffering. Why? Well, we know very well how to get ourselves into these kinds of situations. Why has God allowed us to get there? I don't know. Why is there a scene of tragedy in the midst of this beautiful Christmas story? I don't know. What we do know is that God has promised us in Jesus that we do not need to cry out, why? But when? When, Lord? When? And hope that it ends soon.